Warning: the following video delves into deeply disturbing and graphic content inspired by a real and harrowing incident. Viewer discretion is not just advised, it is imperative. Proceed only if you are prepared for a truly chilling and nightmarish experience. The dark web, a hidden abyss of the internet, cloaked in shadows and dread. It's where the whispers of the unimaginable are said to manifest into reality. Tales of grotesque illegal trades, macabre experiments, and unspeakable horrors circulate among those reckless or desperate enough to delve into its depths. But one story eclipses all others. An incident so nightmarish that it's been expunged from most forums, buried in a grave of silence. Tonight, we're unearthing this terror. Watch if you dare. It begins with a young man named Eric. He was a tech-savvy college student, curious and fearless, with a knack for navigating the deepest, darkest layers of the web. One fateful night, his boredom lured him into a sinister rabbit hole that would forever haunt his existence. A Reddit thread whispered about an infamous dark website called The Human Room. It was a rumored live stream, said to host unspeakable horrors, a place where nightmares were sold to the highest bidder. Eric wasn't just intrigued, he was consumed by a dark curiosity. Armed with his VPN and cryptocurrencies, he delved into the abyss. Hours bled into days as he pieced together cryptic clues, finally unearthing a hidden link. A chilling warning flashed on his screen. "You are about to enter the human room, turn back now." Instead of heeding it, Eric clicked, sealing his fate. The site's interface was stark, a black screen with a single, grainy video feed in the center. The eerie silence of the room was only broken by the faint hum of the computer. The video feed was barely visible, shrouded in darkness, adding to the sense of dread that permeated the air. A timer ominously counted down from 60 minutes. Each second felt like an eternity, the ticking sound echoing in the minds of the viewers. The countdown was a grim reminder of the horror that was about to unfold. Below, a chat window buzzed with frenzied activity as anonymous users placed bets on the impending horror. The chat was a flurry of excitement and fear, with messages flying by at an unreadable speed. The anonymity of the users only added to the sinister atmosphere. Names like Shadow Surge and Bloody Watcher filled the chat, egging each other on with sickening anticipation. The usernames were as dark and twisted as the event they were eagerly awaiting. Each message was a testament to the depravity of the human mind. When the timer hit 0, the screen flickered violently. The sudden change was jarring, sending a wave of unease through the viewers. The flickering screen was a prelude to the terror that was about to be revealed. A dimly lit room came into view, its gray walls closing in around a single steel table. The room was cold and uninviting, with an air of desolation. The steel table stood in stark contrast to the bleak surroundings, its surface reflecting the dim light. On the table lay a man, bound and blindfolded, his body trembling. His restraints were tight, leaving no room for escape. The blindfold covered his eyes, but his fear was palpable, radiating from his every pore. He was alive, his chest heaving with ragged, terrified breaths. Eric's heart pounded in his chest. The sound of his breathing was the only indication of life in the otherwise silent room. Each breath was a struggle, a fight against the overwhelming fear that threatened to consume him. This wasn't a show or a game, this was a living nightmare. The realization hit hard, sending a chill down the spine of every viewer. The horror was real, and there was no turning back. The nightmare had only just begun. A masked figure stepped into view, their face obscured by a porcelain doll mask, its lifeless eyes staring into the void. The mask was eerily perfect, with delicate features that contrasted sharply with the sinister aura it exuded. The figure moved with a slow, deliberate grace, each step echoing in the silent, dark room. They carried a sinister toolset, scalpels, syringes, pliers, each glinting menacingly in the dim light. The tools were meticulously arranged, each one chosen for its potential to inflict maximum pain. The figure's gloved hands moved over the instruments with a practiced ease, selecting each one with a chilling precision. The chat erupted with sadistic glee. "Start with the fingers. Let's see some blood." The comments were a torrent of cruelty, each one more depraved than the last. The faceless audience reveled in the suffering, their words a digital manifestation of their darkest desires. "Take his eyes." Eric froze, paralyzed by the horror unfolding before him. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a deafening drum in the silence of his room. He could feel the bile rising in his throat, but he was powerless to look away. He wanted to flee, to shut down his computer, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. It was as if an invisible force held him in place, compelling him to witness the unfolding nightmare. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling, but he couldn't bring himself to press the power button. It was as if the screen had ensnared his very soul. The images flickered before him, each one more horrifying than the last, and yet he was drawn to them, unable to break free from their macabre allure. The masked figure leaned over the bound man and whispered something vile into his ear. The words were inaudible to Eric, but the effect was immediate. The bound man's eyes widened in terror, his body convulsing with fear. The man's screams, muffled by a gag, echoed through the dark room. Each cry was a desperate plea for mercy, a sound that would haunt Eric's dreams for years to come. The next hour was a descent into pure, unrelenting carnage. Blood splattered across the walls, the floor, the masked figure's pristine attire. The room became a chamber of horrors, each act of violence more brutal than the last. Each act of torture was more grotesque and horrifying than the last. The masked figure moved with a methodical precision, their actions a twisted dance of death and pain. The audience's suggestions grew more depraved, each one pushing the boundaries of human cruelty. The masked figure seemed to thrive on the audience's sadistic suggestions, executing them with chilling precision and cruelty. It was as if they were feeding off the collective darkness of the viewers, their actions becoming more monstrous with each passing moment. Fingers were shattered, skin was peeled away, and the man's muffled cries grew weaker, more desperate with each passing minute. The room was filled with the sickening sounds of flesh being torn and bones breaking, a symphony of suffering that seemed to have no end. Eric's stomach churned violently, but his morbid curiosity kept him glued to the chair. He felt a deep sense of shame, knowing that he was complicit in this horror simply by watching. Yet, he couldn't look away, his eyes locked on the screen as if in a trance. But the nightmare was far from over. The masked figure showed no signs of stopping, their actions becoming more frenzied, more savage. The chat continued to egg them on, each comment a catalyst for further brutality. Eric knew he should turn away, but he was trapped, a prisoner to the horror that unfolded before him. As the final act loomed, the masked figure slowly turned to the camera, its eyes piercing through the darkness. Their voice, a chilling distortion, yet unmistakably human. "We know you're watching, and we know who you are." Eric's blood turned to ice. It felt as though the words were a dagger aimed straight at him. The chat erupted with sinister laughter and mocking jeers, but Eric was paralyzed with fear. He slammed the browser shut and powered off his computer in a panic. His heart pounded violently as he stared at the darkened screen, the sensation of being watched suffocating him. Over the next few days, a series of terrifying events began to unfold. Eric's phone buzzed incessantly with unknown numbers calling at ungodly hours. His webcam light flickered on and off, as if someone, or something, was watching him. One night, as he lay in bed, he heard sinister whispers emanating from his computer. When he turned it on, the screen was pitch black except for a chilling message: "You're next." Eric's paranoia spiraled into sheer terror. He started seeing ominous shadows lurking in the corners of his room, and hearing ghostly footsteps echoing when he was alone. Then came the package. It arrived without warning, shrouded in mystery and darkness. Left on his doorstep, it was wrapped in brown paper, unmarked. No return address, no sender's name, just an ominous presence. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, a snapshot that would change everything. It was Eric, sitting at his computer, watching the human room. The image was unsettling, capturing a moment he thought was private. The photo had been taken from outside his window. Someone had been watching him, lurking in the shadows. He went to the police, but they dismissed his story as a prank. They couldn't understand the fear that gripped him. Desperate, Eric moved to a new apartment and changed all his devices. He hoped a fresh start would bring peace. For a while, the strange occurrences stopped, but the trauma lingered. The fear had taken root deep within him. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't stop looking over his shoulder. Every night was a battle against his own mind. The darkness seemed to watch him, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a constant, unseen presence. Every creak, every shadow sent shivers down his spine. His home, once a sanctuary, had become a prison of fear. Eric armed himself, but deep down, he knew it was futile. The real threat was intangible, a specter haunting his every thought. The horror was not just outside. It had seeped into his very soul. It was a relentless, gnawing dread that refused to let go. Months later, he received an email from an untraceable address. It was a link. Against his better judgment, he clicked it. The screen went black before a familiar voice whispered, "You can't run from us, Eric." That was the last anyone heard from him. Eric vanished into thin air. His belongings were eerily left untouched in his apartment, his phone still charging on the bedside table. The only clue was his laptop, still open to a sinister dark web forum. The top post read, "The Human Room welcomes its newest performer." And from the shadows they watched, waiting for their next victim. What do you think? Was Eric's fate sealed the moment he clicked that link? Or was it all an elaborate hoax? Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. Some corners of the internet are better left unexplored. If you've made it this far, consider yourself warned. Curiosity can be deadly. And sometimes, it's the last thing you'll ever feel. Story 2. Imagine a place where the darkest corners of humanity are not only visible but accessible. A space where the worst of human instincts roam unchecked, where nightmares are born and thrive. This is a story about such a place. The dark web. Jason's heart pounded as he recounted the chilling events that led him to the dark web. The shadows seemed to whisper his name, and every creak of the floorboards sent shivers down his spine. He felt an unseen presence watching him, its cold breath on the back of his neck. As the young man delved deeper, he found himself ensnared in a web of terror, where every click brought him closer to the unknown. This is his story. A chilling journey into the heart of darkness, where the unimaginable becomes all too real. It began with a college student named Jason. He was an ordinary man, but his curiosity often led him down dark paths. Jason had always been drawn to the macabre, fascinated by the unknown and the forbidden. Whispers about the dark web intrigued him, a shadowy realm of the internet where the most sinister and illicit activities took place. Drugs, weapons, counterfeit money, even hired assassins. But for Jason, it wasn't about buying anything. He saw it as a dark challenge, a digital descent into the abyss, something to send chills down his friends' spines. One night, as the wind howled outside and the moon cast an eerie glow through his window, Jason stumbled upon a hidden forum. Users shared tales of unspeakable horrors, and the more he read, the more he felt a dark force pulling him in, as if the stories were coming to life around him. Suddenly, his screen flickered, and a chilling message appeared. "We see you, Jason." His heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He tried to close the browser, but it was too late. The darkness had already found him. One night, he set up his laptop in his dimly lit dorm room, ready for an adventure. The glow of his screen cast eerie, almost sinister shadows on the walls, adding to the tension. With the help of a Tor browser and a VPN, he descended into this digital abyss, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. At first, it seemed disappointingly mundane, not living up to the dark web's notorious reputation. The websites were crude, with basic layouts and cryptic names like the Black Chamber and Mercy's End, which felt almost comical. Most of it seemed like traps designed to ensnare the unwary, making him more cautious. Jason was almost ready to give up when he stumbled upon a forum thread titled, "Do you want to see the truth?" It piqued his curiosity. Intrigued, he clicked on it, unable to resist the lure of the unknown. The thread contained a single link, along with the chilling warning, "Enter at your own peril." It was a dare he couldn't ignore. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. The words echoed in his mind. It was the kind of ominous line that would send shivers down most spines, but not Jason's. He was determined. With trembling hands, Jason typed the forbidden URL, feeling a rush of adrenaline. The screen flickered, and he was plunged into a world of darkness, a realm of the unknown. The eerie glow of the monitor illuminated his face as he navigated through the twisted corridors of the dark web, feeling increasingly uneasy. He could hear faint whispers and distant screams echoing through the void, making his heart race. Jason's face was illuminated by the screen, his expression turning from curiosity to horror as he delved deeper. A shadowy figure seemed to move in the background, a sinister presence that sent chills down his spine, making him question his decision. His hand trembled as he hovered the mouse over the close button, but he couldn't look away, captivated by the horror. The screen began to glitch, an eerie static noise filling the room, heightening his fear. Jason's horrified eyes reflected the screen, unable to escape the digital nightmare unfolding before him, feeling trapped in the abyss. Jason found himself in the Marionette's Playhouse, a site notorious for its grotesque content. The screen displayed lifeless dolls, their eyes following his every move. Suddenly, the dolls began to move, their joints creaking as they performed a macabre dance. Jason's blood ran cold as he realized they were mimicking his every action. The homepage was simple, a black background with red text and an animated GIF of a marionette doll dangling from strings. The doll's face was cracked, and its eyes seemed to follow the cursor. There was no explanation, no description, just one option: enter. Jason hesitated for the first time that night. Something about the site felt wrong, like it shouldn't exist. The lights on the page flickered, casting unsettling shadows, but curiosity got the better of him. He clicked enter. The screen went black. Then a live video feed appeared, flickering to life. It showed a dimly lit room, the light bulb flickering ominously, casting eerie shadows. In the center was a single wooden chair, and tied to it was a man. Shadows seemed to dance around him, creating a haunting scene. His head hung low, his body limp, blood dripping from his mouth, painting a grim picture. Jason's first thought was that it had to be fake, some kind of sick performance art, a twisted prank. Then the man moved, weakly raising his head, the sound of chains rattling echoing in the room. His face was bruised, his eyes wide with terror, pleading silently for help. He mouthed something Jason couldn't hear, but the desperation and tears were unmistakable, a silent cry for mercy. Before Jason could process what he was seeing, a chat box popped up on the screen, startling him. People were typing frantic messages. "Do it already, let's see some blood, make him beg!" Jason's stomach turned. This wasn't a show, it was real. It was a live stream torture session, and the audience was encouraging it with sinister laughter echoing in the background. He moved his cursor to close the browser, but a new message appeared in the chat. "Welcome, Jason." His heart skipped a beat. "Stay a while." Jason froze, his heartbeat pounding in his ears, fear gripping him. How did they know his name? Shadows seemed to creep closer to the screen, as if reaching out to him. Panic set in as he tried to exit the page, but nothing worked. The screen began to glitch, trapping him in the nightmare. Every time he tried to close the browser, the site reloaded, bringing him back to the horrifying scene. Distorted screams filled the air. Then, a voice spoke. It was calm, almost soothing, but it sent chills down Jason's spine, echoing in the room, making him shiver. "You wanted to see the truth, Jason. Here it is." The voice was menacing, filled with dark intent. The voice came from the video feed, from a figure shrouded in darkness. A figure stepped into frame, wearing a black mask with a grotesque smile painted on it, the eyes glowing eerily, adding to the horror. They held a knife, its blade glinting in the dim light stained with blood, a symbol of impending doom. The masked figure turned toward the camera and tilted their head, as if acknowledging Jason's presence with a sinister smile, a chilling recognition. Then, without warning, they plunged the knife into the bound man's leg, blood splattering everywhere, painting the scene in red. The man screamed, a raw, guttural sound that Jason would never forget, echoing in his mind, haunting him. Jason's hands shook as he slammed his laptop shut. He'd had enough, his mind reeling. He disconnected it from the internet and powered it off, his breathing heavy, trying to calm himself. But the nightmare didn't end there. Shadows seemed to linger in his room, a constant reminder of the horror he witnessed. The next morning, Jason woke to find an email in his inbox. his heart sinking as he saw the notification. The subject line read, "You can't hide." It was chilling and ominous. The email contained a single attachment, a photo of Jason taken from his webcam, staring at his screen the night before. It was a clear invasion of his privacy. The message read, "We're always watching." The word sent shivers down his spine. Over the next few days, Jason's life unraveled. He was constantly on edge. He started noticing strange things happening around him. His laptop would turn on by itself, casting an eerie glow in the dark room. Files he'd never downloaded appeared on his desktop, adding to his growing paranoia. Videos of himself, recorded without his knowledge, began showing up in his email. It was terrifying. He stopped going to classes, too scared to leave his room. Isolation became his new normal. He covered his windows and taped over his webcam, but it didn't make him feel any safer. The fear was relentless. Then, one night, the power in his dorm went out, plunging him into darkness. Jason sat in the darkness, clutching his phone, his only source of light. As he sat there, his phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a notification from an unknown number, adding to his dread. The message was simple: "Look outside." Jason's heart pounded in his chest. Against his better judgment, he peeked through the blinds, his hands trembling. Standing on the street below was someone wearing the same grotesque mask from the video. It was a horrifying sight. They looked up at his window and waved, a sinister gesture that made his blood run cold. Jason didn't wait to see what would happen next. He had to get out. He grabbed his keys and bolted out of his dorm, his heart racing. He drove to his parents' house that night, but even there he couldn't escape the feeling that he was being watched. The paranoia followed him. The masked figure never physically harmed him, but the psychological torment was worse. It was a constant presence. Jason dropped out of college and moved to a different state, but he'll never forget the night he ventured into the dark web and the horrors he found there. It changed his life forever. He was haunted by nightmares, the faces of the victims etched into his mind. Sleep offered no escape. He could hear their cries for help, their voices echoing in his head, a constant reminder of his ordeal. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking danger, making him jump at every movement. He felt a constant sense of being watched, a paranoia that never left him. Jason's warning to others was clear: stay away from the dark web. He recounted the horrors he had witnessed, the lives destroyed by the malevolent forces that lurked in the shadows. His voice trembled as he spoke, the fear evident in his eyes. He knew that once you entered the dark web, you could never truly escape its grasp. Story 3. The internet is a vast and intricate web of connections, but hidden beneath the surface lies something far darker: the dark web. It's a place where secrets are buried, anonymity is king, and humanity's worst instincts thrive. Here, the most disturbing and horrifying aspects of human nature are given free rein. What you are about to hear is the true story of a young woman named Rachel, whose life was forever changed after a single fateful night spent exploring the shadowy, malevolent corners of the internet. Prepare yourself for a journey into the abyss. Rachel was a college senior, majoring in computer science. She was brilliant, ambitious, and always seeking a challenge. Like many tech-savvy students, she had heard whispers about the dark web. To Rachel, it was less a place of danger and more a puzzle to be solved. The eerie tales of hidden marketplaces and forbidden knowledge only fueled her curiosity. Could she navigate its depths without getting caught? Could she uncover its secrets without losing herself in the shadows? One Friday night, curiosity got the better of her. Armed with her laptop, a Tor browser, and a secure VPN, Rachel ventured into the unknown. She had heard whispers about the dark web, a place where secrets and shadows thrived, and tonight she was determined to explore it. At first it was underwhelming: shoddy websites, outdated forums, and cryptic marketplaces. It seemed like a digital wasteland filled with relics of a forgotten era. But then she found a link titled Feast of Shadows. It stood out amidst the digital debris, almost beckoning her to click. The name intrigued her. Beneath it was a warning: only for those who seek the truth. Enter at your own peril. The ominous message sent a shiver down her spine. but her curiosity was insatiable. Rachel hesitated, but ultimately clicked. Her heart raced as she waited for the page to load, wondering what she had just gotten herself into. The site loaded slowly, revealing a pitch-black screen with a single blinking cursor. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Words began to type themselves. "Welcome to the feast. Are you worthy?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Below there were 2 buttons. Yes and no. It felt like a test, a challenge she couldn't ignore. Without thinking too much, Rachel clicked. Yes. Her decision was impulsive, driven by a mix of fear and excitement. The screen flickered, and then a video feed appeared. It was grainy and dark, adding to the sense of foreboding. The camera showed an old, decrepit dining room. It looked like something out of a nightmare, a place where time had stood still. The table was long, covered in a tattered cloth and set with mismatched plates. Each plate seemed to tell a story of its own, stories she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. At each seat sat a figure, motionless, silent, and shrouded in darkness. They were like statues, frozen in time. Their faces were obscured by ornate masks, each one more grotesque than the last. The masks were unsettling, as if they were hiding something far more sinister. A voice crackled through her speakers. It was unexpected, making her jump slightly. It was deep and distorted, almost inhuman. The voice seemed to come from the depths of the abyss. "Welcome, guest. You have been chosen to join the feast. But first, prove your devotion, prove your worth." Rachel's heart pounded. The words echoed in her mind, filling her with dread. This had to be some kind of elaborate hoax. She tried to rationalize it, but the fear was real. Still, she couldn't tear her eyes away. The screen held her captive, like a moth to a flame. A chat box appeared beneath the video, filled with usernames she didn't recognize. The names were strange, almost otherworldly. The messages were chilling. "She's new, let's see how far she'll go. They always break. The feast awaits." Each message was like a dagger, piercing her resolve. The camera panned across the table, stopping at an empty seat. It was as if the seat was waiting for her. A sign in front of it read, "Rachel." Her name, in bold letters, sent a wave of terror through her. Her blood ran cold. She hadn't entered her name anywhere. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. How did they know who she was? The question lingered, unanswered, as the screen seemed to mock her with its silence. Suddenly, the screen flashed with graphic images of mutilated bodies, their faces twisted in agony. Rachel recoiled in horror, her stomach churning. A hand seemed to reach out from the screen, as if trying to pull her in. She screamed, her mind unable to process the terror unfolding before her. The screen then showed a live feed of her own room. Panic set in as she looked around, realizing she was being watched. A final message appeared. "We are coming for you, Rachel." Her face went pale, the words echoing in her mind like a death sentence. The distorted voice returned, echoing through the dark room like a sinister whisper. "Your first task is simple. Share something precious, something no one else knows, a secret that has never seen the light of day." A text box appeared on her screen. Rachel's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to exit the site, but every attempt to close the browser failed. Panic set in as she realized she was trapped. Her laptop seemed frozen, trapped in the grip of the feast. The eerie glow from the screen cast shadows on her face. Desperate to escape, she typed a small secret, her fingers trembling as they hit the keys. Something inconsequential from her childhood, a memory she thought would be harmless. She hit submit, hoping that would be enough to satisfy the demand. The voice laughed, low and menacing, sending chills down her spine. "Pathetic. We require more." The words appeared on the screen, mocking her feeble attempt. Suddenly, the camera feed changed, glitching for a moment before revealing a new scene. It now displayed Rachel's dorm room, the familiar surroundings now twisted by the eerie lighting. The angle was from her laptop webcam, a perspective she never expected to see. She stared in horror at herself on the screen. The chat erupted with sinister glee. "She's scared. I love it. Run, little rabbit." The messages taunted her, each one more disturbing than the last. Too late for that now. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. There was no escape. "Your next task," the voice boomed, "is to witness the truth." The words echoed in the dark room, sending chills down Rachel's spine. The video feed shifted again, this time showing a dimly lit basement. A man was tied to a chair, his face bruised and bloody. The sight was horrifying, and Rachel could barely keep her eyes on the screen. Behind him stood a figure in one of the grotesque masks. The masked figure held a knife, its blade catching the light. The glint of the knife was menacing, reflecting the dire situation. Rachel's stomach churned as she realized what was about to happen. The fear and disgust were almost too much to bear. "Decide his fate," the voice commanded. "Will he live or die?" The question hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. Two buttons appeared on her screen: live and die. The simplicity of the choice was deceptive, masking the gravity of the decision. The chat exploded with messages urging her to choose death. The flood of violent messages was overwhelming, each one more aggressive than the last. "Do it," the messages screamed. "He deserves it, let's see some blood." The cruelty of the crowd was palpable, their bloodlust insatiable. Rachel's hands trembled. She couldn't bring herself to click either option. The weight of the decision was paralyzing. Tears streamed down her face as the voice grew impatient. The pressure was mounting, and Rachel felt like she was about to break. "You must choose, Rachel, or we will choose for you." The threat was clear, and the urgency in the voice was unmistakable. Rachel knew she had to make a decision, but the fear was overwhelming. Before she could act, the masked figure in the video plunged the knife into the man's chest. His screams echoed through her speakers, a sound that would haunt her forever. The chat erupted in cheers and applause. Rachel slammed her laptop shut, but the screaming continued. The sound wasn't coming from her computer anymore. It was coming from inside her dorm. She turned to see the masked figure standing in her doorway holding the bloody knife. Rachel's heart pounded as she frantically searched for an escape. The masked figure advanced menacingly, each step echoing her growing terror. She screamed for help, her voice a desperate cry in the suffocating darkness. The world spun as Rachel's vision blurred, and everything went dark. Rachel was never seen again. Her disappearance remains a chilling mystery. Whispers persist about a new seat at the Feast of Shadows, marked with her name. Some say they still hear her cries in the dead of night, echoing through the dark web's abyss. So, if you ever feel tempted to explore the dark web, heed this warning. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some doors should never be opened. Because once you step into the feast, you may never find your way out. The darkness will consume you, and the horrors you uncover will haunt you forever. Story 4. The story begins with a man named Jake. He was an ordinary guy, just like anyone else. He worked a 9-to-5 job, spent time with his friends on weekends, and indulged in a little bit of online shopping and gaming. One night, however, his life took a dark turn when he stumbled upon a strange link on the internet. Little did he know this was the beginning of his nightmare. The eerie music sets the tone as Jake's curiosity leads him down a path of no return. His screen flickers and a shadowy figure appears, whispering his name. Jake's heart races as he tries to close the window, but it's too late. The figure's eyes glow red, and a sinister smile spreads across its face. Jake's nightmare has just begun. It was a Friday evening when Jake came across a strange link in a forum he frequented. It wasn't from any well-known site. It was hidden deep in a thread about hacking, cryptography, and the dark web. The link was simple, just a random string of letters and numbers. But there was something about it that caught Jake's attention. He clicked on it. Jake couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The mysterious link had opened a portal to a world of darkness. As he navigated through the ominous website, he received a message. "We are watching you, Jake." His blood ran cold. The screen glitched, and disturbing images flashed before his eyes. Faces twisted in agony, eyes filled with terror. Jake's hands trembled as he tried to shut down his computer, but the messages kept coming, each more horrifying than the last. The first encounter was the most terrifying. Jake woke up in the middle of the night to find his room filled with shadows. The air was thick with a sense of dread. He heard whispers, voices calling his name from the darkness. He turned on the light, but the shadows remained. They moved closer, their eyes glowing with malevolence. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he realized he was not alone. The shadows reached out to him, their touch cold and clammy. Jake screamed, but no sound came out. He was trapped in his own nightmare. A few hours later, as Jake lay in bed, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over him, his phone buzzed unexpectedly. It was an unknown number, but the message was what made his blood run cold. "We know what you did." Jake froze, his mind racing to understand what this could mean. He had done nothing illegal, nothing that would warrant such a message. His thoughts spiraled, trying to recall any incident that could have led to this. He assumed it was a scam, someone trying to scare him. He dismissed the message, shaking his head in disbelief. But as the night wore on, things got worse. The phone kept ringing incessantly, each call more unnerving than the last. Unknown numbers, all with the same cryptic message. It was as if someone was determined to break him. Then his computer started acting up again. The screen glitched, and strange windows began to pop up. A particularly disturbing window showed a live feed of his own room. Someone was watching him. Panic set in, his heart pounding in his chest. Jake turned off the webcam, unplugged the computer, and checked his phone for any signs of malware or strange apps. He was desperate to find the source of this invasion. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. His phone appeared clean, no unusual apps or settings. Yet, the feeling that something was watching him didn't go away. It gnawed at him, making him feel paranoid and scared. The messages began to haunt Jake day and night. They appeared on his phone, his computer, even on his bathroom mirror. "You can't escape us, Jake." The words were written in blood, sending chills down his spine. Jake's sanity began to unravel as the messages became more personal, revealing his deepest fears and darkest secrets. He saw visions of his loved ones in torment, their faces twisted in pain, their cries echoing in his mind. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and Jake felt himself slipping into madness. He struggled to distinguish what was real from what was a figment of his tormented mind, feeling more isolated and desperate with each passing moment. That's when the nightmares started. They crept into his life like an uninvited guest, slowly at first, but soon they became relentless. At first, they were just shadows at the corner of his vision, barely noticeable, almost like a trick of the light. But soon the figures grew clearer, more defined, as if they were stepping out of the shadows and into his reality. In his dreams, he saw the same faces over and over again, strange, faceless people who seemed to be waiting for him, their presence both haunting and inexplicable. They were never in the same place, but they always knew where he was, as if they were connected to him by some invisible thread. The faces began to show up even when he was awake, blurring the lines between his dreams and reality. Jake started seeing them in his reflection, in the corner of his eye, always lurking, always watching. Sometimes, he would catch a glimpse of a figure standing just outside his window, a dark silhouette against the night sky. But when he would check, there would be no one there, just the empty, silent night staring back at him. Every night, Jake found himself in a different hellish landscape, chased by faceless creatures, their screams echoing in his ears, filling him with a terror that felt all too real. He saw his own death in countless gruesome ways. The nightmares felt so real that Jake woke up with bruises and cuts, as if he had truly lived through those horrors. He was losing his grip on reality, and the fear was consuming him, eating away at his sanity bit by bit. The dark web had a hold on him, and it wasn't letting go. It was as if the nightmares were a manifestation of something deeper, something darker that had taken root in his mind. Desperate for help, Jake reached out to anyone who would listen, but no one believed him. They thought he was losing his mind. The more he tried to explain, the more isolated he became. The dark web had made sure of that. Jake's pleas for help were met with silence, and he felt the walls closing in on him. He was alone in his nightmare, with no way out. He was sitting in his living room, the lights dimmed, when his phone buzzed once again. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. He hesitated but picked it up. His fingers trembled as he swiped the screen, a sense of dread washing over him. The screen displayed a message. "We are coming for you, Jake." The words seemed to pulse with a life of their own, each letter a harbinger of doom. Suddenly, the lights in his apartment went out. Darkness enveloped him, swallowing the room in an instant. A cold breeze rushed through the room. It was as if the very air had turned against him, chilling him to the bone. He heard the distinct sound of footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate. Each step echoed like a countdown to his doom. He spun around, but there was nothing. Just darkness. The silence was deafening, amplifying his fear. Panic set in, and Jake rushed to the door. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a desperate plea for escape. But as he reached for the handle, something stopped him, his phone. It was a lifeline and a curse all at once. It rang, the screen lighting up with another unknown number. The glow of the screen was a stark contrast to the surrounding darkness. He answered it, and all he heard was a voice that seemed to come from the depths of his worst nightmares. Not a person, but a distorted, growling whisper. "We see you. You can't escape." The line went dead. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the voice itself. Then a video appeared on his screen showing his own house from the outside. The camera angle was unsettling, as if someone was watching him from the shadows. Jake's blood turned to ice as he realized the dark web was not just a virtual nightmare. It was real, and it was coming for him. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating him with fear. He barricaded himself in his room, but the shadows found a way in. They were relentless, seeping through every crack and crevice. They surrounded him, their eyes glowing with hunger. The darkness was alive, and it was ravenous. Jake knew he couldn't escape. The dark web had claimed him. His fate was sealed, and there was no turning back. In a frantic bid for survival, Jake grabbed his things and fled his house in the dead of night. The streets were empty, and the air was thick with a sense of impending doom. The shadows followed, closing in on him. He could hear their whispers, feel their cold breath on his neck. Jake's heart raced as he ran through the dark alleys. He stumbled and fell, and the shadows pounced. Jake fought with all his might, but the darkness was too strong. He felt himself being pulled into the abyss. Jake thought he had escaped, but the dark web never lets go. He moved cities, changed his name, and started a new life. But the shadows were always there, lurking in the corners of his mind. He saw their eyes in every reflection, heard their whispers in every silence. The dark web had left its mark on him, and he knew he would never be free. The nightmare was far from over, but that's the thing about the dark web. It never really lets you go. Jake's new life was a facade, a fragile mask hiding the terror that lurked beneath. The shadows were always there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jake lived in constant fear, knowing that the dark web was watching, waiting. He could feel its presence, a cold, malevolent force that would never let him go. The nightmare was his reality now. The dark web is not just a myth. It is real, and it is dangerous. Jake's story is a testament to the horrors that lurk in the shadows of the internet. The dark web preys on the curious, the unsuspecting, and once it has you, it never lets go. Beware the dark web, for it is a gateway to a world of nightmares. Jake's tale is a cautionary one, a reminder that some doors should never be opened. Are you sure you're safe? Story 5. Ethan's life was ordinary until he stumbled upon the dark web. The eerie silence of his room was broken only by the hum of his computer. As he delved deeper, he felt an inexplicable chill, as if unseen eyes were watching him. One night, while alone in his dimly lit apartment, curiosity consumed him. He downloaded the necessary tools, a Tor browser, a VPN, layers of protection he believed would shield him from any danger. With trembling fingers, he ventured in, drawn to the darkest corners of the web, where grotesque images and videos played on a loop. The more he watched, the more he felt a sinister presence lurking behind him, whispering his name. What started as harmless curiosity quickly spiraled into something Ethan could never have imagined. Ethan discovered a forgotten network, a place where the most depraved minds gathered. The screen flickered, revealing disturbing images of tortured souls. Ethan's heart raced as he realized he was no longer just a spectator. He was being watched. One post caught his eye, the eyes of the abyss. Enter if you dare. Below was a countdown timer and a link. The timer indicated that something would begin in just 2 minutes. Ethan's pulse quickened. He debated closing his laptop and walking away, but curiosity kept him frozen in place. 2 minutes later, the link became active. The eyes of the abyss stared back at Ethan. He could feel their cold, unblinking gaze piercing through the screen. Shadows danced around his room, and he could hear faint whispers, growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. Against his better judgment, he clicked it. The screen went black for a moment before a live stream appeared. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he stared at the screen, unsure of what to expect. The sudden transition from darkness to the eerie live stream was jarring, making him feel as though he had been thrust into a nightmare. The setting was a dimly lit room with an old wooden chair in the center. The chair looked ancient, its wood splintered and worn, as if it had witnessed countless horrors over the years. Shadows danced around the room, creating an unsettling atmosphere that made Ethan's skin crawl. Heavy chains dangled from the ceiling, swaying slightly as though moved by an unseen force. The chains clinked softly, adding to the sense of dread that permeated the room. Each movement of the chains seemed to whisper secrets of torment and suffering. The atmosphere was suffocating, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. It was the silence of anticipation, the calm before the storm. Ethan could feel his pulse quicken, the tension in the air almost palpable. A distorted voice echoed through Ethan's speakers. "Welcome, viewer." The voice was chilling, its tone dripping with malice. It felt as though the speaker was addressing Ethan directly, piercing through the screen and into his very soul. "What you're about to witness cannot be unseen. Stay if you dare." The warning sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the mouse, contemplating whether to close the stream or continue watching. The camera zoomed in on the chair as a masked figure was dragged into view. The figure's movements were jerky and unnatural, as if they were being controlled by some malevolent force. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he watched in horror. The masked figure began performing unspeakable acts, each one more horrifying than the last. Ethan's stomach churned as he watched, unable to tear his eyes away from the screen. Suddenly, the figure's eyes locked onto Ethan's through the screen. A wave of terror washed over him, freezing him in place. It felt as though the figure could see him, could sense his fear. He tried to convince himself it was staged, a sick performance meant to scare viewers. But the realism of the scene made it hard to believe. Every detail, from the figure's movements to the eerie atmosphere, felt too genuine to be an act. But deep down, he knew this was no act. The fear in the figure's eyes, the malice in its actions, it all felt too real. Ethan's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. The distorted voice returned. "I know you're watching, Ethan." The words hung in the air, a grim reminder of the dangers of delving too deep into the unknown. Ethan felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "You're next." Ethan's blood ran cold. The implication was terrifying, suggesting that he could become the next victim. He felt a chill run down his spine, his fear intensifying. The figure in the chair began thrashing violently as the sound of footsteps echoed in the background. The footsteps grew louder, each one sending a jolt of fear through Ethan. He could barely breathe as he watched the horrifying scene unfold, feeling utterly helpless. A shadowy figure entered the frame, clad in black, face obscured by a mask that looked like a twisted, smiling face. The mask was unnervingly detailed, with exaggerated features that seemed to mock anyone who dared to look at it. The eyes of the mask were hollow, dark voids that seemed to suck in all light, adding to the figure's menacing presence. The masked figure carried a small, rusted toolbox. The toolbox itself looked ancient, covered in rust and grime, as if it had been used for unspeakable acts over many years. What happened next was beyond comprehension, a scene that would be etched into the minds of those who witnessed it. The masked figure opened the toolbox and methodically began removing tools, pliers, each tool carefully selected and placed on a dark, ominous table. The tools gleamed under the dim light, their sharp edges promising pain and suffering. A scalpel, a hammer. The figure in the chair writhed and screamed as the masked man approached. The masked figure's movements were slow and deliberate, each step echoing in the silent room, heightening the sense of dread. Ethan wanted to look away, to close the stream, but he couldn't. It was as if the screen held him captive. His eyes were glued to the horrifying scene unfolding before him, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, unable to tear himself away. The masked figure began his horrifying work. Each movement was precise, almost surgical, as if the figure had done this countless times before. The room was filled with the sounds of metal against flesh, a symphony of terror. Each movement was calculated, each act more gruesome than the last. The masked figure seemed to take pleasure in the pain he inflicted, his twisted smile never wavering. Ethan could hear the wet, sickening sounds of flesh being torn and bones cracking. The sounds were so vivid, so real, that he could almost feel the pain himself. It was a nightmare come to life. The blindfolded man's screams eventually turned into a haunting silence. The silence was even more terrifying than the screams, a void that seemed to swallow all hope. Ethan knew he would never forget this night, the night he witnessed true horror. But the horror didn't end there. Every night, Ethan saw the masked figure standing at the foot of his bed, its eyes glowing with malevolence. His screams echoed in the darkness, but no one could hear him. He was trapped in his own nightmare, haunted by the figure that had invaded his life. Ethan finally broke free from his trance and closed the stream, slamming his laptop shut with a force that echoed through the room. The screen went dark, but the images from the stream were still burned into his mind. His heart was racing, pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, a physical manifestation of the terror that gripped him. But as he sat there, trying to catch his breath and calm his nerves, his phone buzzed on the table, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. It was a text from an unknown number, the kind that usually went straight to spam, but this one was different. It felt personal, invasive. "Why did you leave? Don't you want to see the rest?" The message read. His heart dropped into his stomach, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He stared at the message in disbelief, his mind racing to make sense of it. How did they know he had left? Who were they? Moments later, his laptop screen lit up, even though it was closed. The glow was eerie, casting long shadows in the dark room. The same distorted voice echoed through the room. "You can't hide, Ethan." The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Panic set in, a primal fear that made his skin crawl. Ethan unplugged his laptop, removed the battery, and even threw his phone across the room in a desperate attempt to silence the voice. But it was no use. The voice didn't stop. It was relentless, a haunting presence that seemed to fill every corner of his apartment. It was coming from every device in his apartment. The TV, the speakers, even the smart fridge. It was as if the very walls were speaking to him. His TV turned on, showing the same live stream he had just closed. The images were even more disturbing now, the masked figure more menacing. The chair was empty now, but the masked figure stood in front of the camera, holding a piece of paper. The figure's eyes seemed to bore into Ethan's soul. It had Ethan's full name and address written on it, a chilling reminder that whoever was behind this knew exactly where he lived. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He wasn't safe, not here, not anywhere. Ethan's nightmare began to bleed into reality. He saw the masked figure everywhere he went. It followed him, taunting him with its silent presence. Ethan's sanity began to unravel as he realized there was no escape from the horror that had consumed his life. The harassment intensified. Every night, his devices would turn on by themselves, playing the same distorted voice. Ethan received threatening messages and disturbing images. Shadows moved in his apartment when no one was there. He could hear footsteps outside his door at night, and the feeling of being watched never left him. One night, Ethan woke up to find a small, rusted toolbox at the foot of his bed. Inside were the same tools he had seen in the stream. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and Ethan was losing his grip. The police found Ethan's apartment in disarray a week later. His computer screen was still flickering, but Ethan was gone. The last thing anyone heard from him was a chilling scream, followed by silence. Ethan had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and fear. To this day, No one knows what happened to Ethan. Some say he became a victim of the dark web's horrors. Others believe he's still out there, trapped in the abyss he dared to explore. The warning was clear: stay away from the dark web. Ethan's story served as a grim reminder of the horrors that lurk in the shadows. Those who dared to explore its depths risked losing their sanity, their lives, and their very souls. The darkness was always watching, waiting for its next victim. It started like any other night. Emma, a freelance writer, was sitting at her desk, sipping on a cup of coffee, typing away. The glow of her computer screen was the only light in the room. She had been working late into the night for weeks now, trying to finish a contract she'd taken on from a new client. But something felt off. An unsettling silence seemed to whisper dark secrets. She felt a chill run down her spine as she noticed shadows moving in the corners of her room, shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. It was when she received an email from an unknown address that her life took a turn she never saw coming. Emma had always been cautious with her online presence, but this email was different. It felt personal, invasive, and deeply unsettling. The subject line simply read, "I know your secrets." It was a phrase that sent chills down her spine, making her feel exposed and vulnerable. Emma's heart pounded as she opened it. She had no idea what to expect, but the fear of the unknown gripped her tightly. The email contained disturbing images of herself taken without her knowledge. These were not just any images, they were intimate, private moments that no one should have access to. The email promised more horrors if she didn't comply. The threat was clear and the stakes were high. The darkness is already inside. The words echoed in her mind, creating a sense of dread that she couldn't shake off. She shook her head, thinking it was some kind of prank or a phishing attempt. But deep down, she knew this was something far more sinister. Still, the timing seemed strange. Why would someone send such an email in the dead of night? It had come in the middle of the night, and the email seemed oddly specific. The details were too accurate to be a coincidence. There was no way anyone could know about her late-night working habits, her routine of checking obscure forums for inspiration, her love for browsing strange corners of the internet. These were her private moments, her sanctuary. She immediately deleted the email, but her hand lingered over the mouse, the strange unease gnawing at her. What if deleting it wasn't enough? What if the sender had more ways to reach her? Her instincts screamed to ignore it, to go to bed and forget the whole thing. But as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the unease only grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, that her every move was being monitored. The night stretched on, filled with restless thoughts and unanswered questions. But curiosity, always a dangerous thing, got the better of Emma. She clicked the link in the email, leading her to a dark web forum filled with grotesque images and videos. The more she scrolled, the more she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The address led her to a forum, hidden deep in the dark web, a forum that shouldn't have existed. It was a cesspool of human depravity. Emma's eyes widened in horror as she stumbled upon a live feed of a person being tortured. The screams were real, and the chat was filled with people placing bets on how long the victim would last. Emma thought about leaving. She should have, but instead she clicked on a thread titled, "Join Us." It was a link to a live feed. The title of the thread wasn't a joke. The moment she clicked it, her screen flickered, and her room became eerily silent. She found herself watching a live video. Disturbing images flashed on the screen. A man, bound to a chair, his face covered in blood, was staring at the camera, whispering, "They will find you. You can't hide." She tried to close the page, but it wouldn't close. The video kept playing even as her browser froze, and then came the text. "It's too late, you're already here." Emma's heart pounded. Emma couldn't look away from the live feed. The horrifying scene was burned into her mind. She felt a sickening mix of fear and fascination as the torturer turned to the camera and whispered, "You're next, Emma." Panicking, Emma tried to disconnect from the dark web, but her computer seemed to have a mind of its own. The screen flickered with disturbing images, and a distorted voice echoed through her speakers. His lips curled into a grotesque smile, and as if mocking her, he whispered, "You can't escape." Terrified, Emma unplugged her computer and threw it across the room, hoping to break the connection. But the damage had been done. Later that night, Emma lay in bed, trying to shake off the terrifying images from the screen. She thought it was just a dream, some hallucination brought on by her tired mind. Emma's phone rang, the caller ID showing unknown. She hesitated but answered. A chilling voice on the other end said, "I can see you." She looked around her room, feeling eyes on her from every direction. In the days that followed, Emma tried to go about her life, but the feeling of being watched never left her. It was like there was a presence in the room with her at all times. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains made her jump. Her nights were filled with strange dreams, visions of dark figures, faceless people staring at her through cracked windows. And every time she woke up, it was always the same, the sound of breathing, the feeling of cold hands on her shoulders. She knew she wasn't alone, but she couldn't see who or what was there. Then one evening, after returning from a late grocery run, Emma's worst nightmare came true. She had always felt a strange presence in her apartment, but tonight it was different. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. She entered her apartment, and as soon as she closed the door, she heard a whisper from the shadows. It was a faint, eerie sound that sent chills down her spine, making her heart race. "We're waiting." Frozen with fear, Emma turned toward the voice. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape, but her body refused to move. In the corner of her living room, a figure stood, cloaked in darkness. It was as if the shadows themselves had come to life, taking on a menacing form. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and the air around her grew colder. The temperature seemed to drop with each step the figure took, making her breath visible in the icy air. The face was hidden in shadow, but she could hear the soft, steady breath. It was a sound that seemed to echo in the silence, amplifying her fear. "You should have never looked," the voice said. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the room with its ominous presence. "Now you belong to us." Emma wanted to scream, but her voice was lost. It was as if the very air had been sucked out of her lungs, leaving her mute and helpless. Her entire body went numb as the figure moved toward her. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, paralyzing her with fear. She couldn't move, couldn't run. Her legs felt like lead, and her mind was a whirlwind of terror and confusion. All she could do was watch as the figure came closer, whispering her deepest fears back to her, feeding off her terror. The air grew heavier, colder, darker. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, wrapping around her, suffocating her with its presence. Emma knew in that moment that she was truly trapped, with no hope of escape. The next morning, Emma was found at her desk, staring at a blank screen, a shell of her former self. The vibrant, confident woman who once navigated the digital world with ease was now reduced to a mere shadow, haunted by the events of the previous night. She couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over her. It was as if an invisible weight pressed down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. The room felt colder, the air thicker, and every creak of the floorboards sent shivers down her spine. Every shadow, every noise was a reminder of the horrors she had witnessed. The once familiar sounds of her home now seemed foreign and menacing. The shadows on the walls seemed to move with a life of their own, creeping closer, threatening to engulf her. Her computer had been turned on, and when the investigators checked it, they found nothing. No files, no history, no trace of the dark web forum she had stumbled upon. It was as if her computer had been wiped clean, leaving no evidence of the nightmare she had experienced. No evidence. No trace of the dark web forum, no record of the email or the disturbing live feed. The investigators were baffled, their frustration growing with each passing minute. How could something so terrifying leave no trace behind? It was as if it had all vanished, erased. The digital footprints that should have been there were gone, leaving behind an eerie silence. The investigators could only shake their heads in disbelief, unable to comprehend the extent of the erasure. But when they checked her phone, they found something that shouldn't have been there. One final chilling message: "You're next." The message was simple, yet it carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. It was a warning, a threat, and a promise all rolled into one. Emma's story spread across the internet, and many who heard it dismissed it as just another dark web myth, a warning for the curious. But there were those who took it seriously, who saw it as a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking in the hidden corners of the internet. But others, those who dared to search the dark web for themselves, started receiving strange messages, emails from unknown sources, disturbing videos, and whispers from the shadows. The more they delved into the dark web, the more they found themselves entangled in a web of fear and paranoia. And for those who thought they could ignore the warnings, for those who thought they were safe, they soon found themselves staring into the same darkness that claimed Emma. The darkness was relentless, consuming everything in its path, leaving behind only fear and uncertainty. The aftermath of Emma's ordeal was a stark reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Emma's warning to others was clear: stay away from the dark web, it's a gateway to nightmares you can't escape. Her voice trembled with the weight of her experiences, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks online.